This is an MJA Inc. Investigations warning. This MJA podcast is rated E for explicit. Some details of a case and language used on this podcast might be upsetting to some of our listeners. Listeners' discretion is advised. And for those who are still with us, kick back and enjoy the show. Welcome to our MJ podcast, this series. Welcome to Serial Killer Avenue, Episode 3, Part 5. Serial Killer. 4 California Unsolved Homicides. The Murder Accountability Project and Project Cold Case are volunteer groups who collects data on unsolved homicides. These two groups report that from 1980 to 2019, the United States has over 270,000 unsolved homicides for that time period. It is unsettling how many strings of mysterious unsolved murders are out there that have never been solved. The victim's killer still roaming about and free of their deadly actions. Unsolved homicides instills fear that the deaths were never accounted for or answered for, and justice was elusive. Good evening. My name is Mark, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Joining me later will be our co-host, Olivia. Olivia and I will profile 4 California unsolved homicides covering 2 cases. We are coming to you from our office in the Northeast Kingdom of the Adirondack Mountains, located in Morrisonville, New York. Welcome to the state of California. California is one of the states to produce the most serial killers nationwide. There has been over 1,600 California residents that have been murdered by a serial killer since 1900. During the years of the 1960s to the 1980s, serial killings more than doubled in California and across the United States. These serial killers on the loose instilled terror into the general public. Serial killings will go on to shock a peaceful community to the core, to which has remained unexplained to this day. It seems the serial killers who haven't been caught has drawn up the perfect blueprint, doing these types of killings without getting caught and leaving little evidence behind. FBI profiler Robert Ressler had coined the term serial killer after conducting several interviews with killers who killed multiple people. Ressler's in-depth penetration into the minds of the sexual psychopaths led him to become the world's foremost expert on murder. But in my opinion, John Douglas was the best profiler ever in my lifetime. On this episode, we will profile two cases that are unusual in the sense there are two victims in each case. Sometimes it's hard for the killer to control one victim, let alone two victims at once. But each case has the making that the killings were done by a serial killer. The first case has been reported as being two victims of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker serial killer. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders were a series of at least 7 unsolved homicides involving female hitchhikers that took place in Sonoma County and in Santa Rosa of the North Bay area of California in 1972 and 1973. All the victims were found in rural areas near steep embankments or in creek beds near roads. All the victims were known to hitchhike, a popular mode of transportation during that time in the 1970s. The so-called Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders have been linked to other crimes that occurred in the late 1960s and early 1970s. But were the facts made up to meet the MO of a particular murderer thought to have committed the killings? And the most looked at was the Zodiac Killer and Ted Bundy. But what came to light was the Zodiac Killer didn't sexually assault his female victims. The Zodiac's known DNA profile didn't match the DNA found at the crime scenes. Even though in a 1969 letter the Zodiac Killer had written, the serial killer stated that he would no longer be announcing his killings and he would be changing his MO. After that letter, the Zodiac Killer no longer claimed any murders. The Zodiac Killer was cleared as a suspect in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders in 2 separate investigations that were conducted years apart. As for the serial killer, Ted Bundy, investigators found a paper trail that shows Bundy was in the state of Washington on the dates of 2 murders that is connected to the Santa Rosa hitchhiker serial killer. A 1975 FBI report. In 1975, the Federal Bureau of Investigations issued a report stating that 14 unsolved homicides between 1972 and 1974 were committed by the same perpetrator. DNA from some of the cases were submitted to the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, a national DNA database, but it didn't produce a match. Then in 2018, DNA from the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders and the Zodiac murders were brought out for testing, hoping to identify the killers in the same manner the Golden State Killer was caught. To my knowledge, those results have never been released. MJA has a theory for a suspect in some of these killings. After interviewing two former members of the Charles Manson family for several years now, we have some info that the serial killer could be a Charles Manson family defector. At the beginning, Manson had a large following with people who had steady jobs and owned property, but they were into the drug scene and into the ladies that loved to party. Most of these people had never been arrested or fingerprinted or had their blood drawn by law enforcement. Therefore, the evidence such as fingerprints, a palm print, and DNA that has been collected at some of these crime scenes will not lead you to the killer. It's our view that this killer honed his skills in the desert with Manson, and this killer learned from the mistakes made during the Tate and Lea Blanca killings. This killer could be ex-military. Just think about it for a moment. This would explain a lot of things. Just a side note, the Hillside Stranglers of Los Angeles. Ken Bianchi and Angelo Buono, the Hillside Stranglers of Los Angeles, are considered suspects in some of the killings happening in early 1976 and ending in February 1978, where there was no valuable evidence collected in these cases. In January 1976, Kenneth Bianchi left Rochester, New York, and moved to Los Angeles to live with his cousin, Angelo Buono. The reason for the move: Ken Bianchi was the main suspect for being the serial killer labeled the Alphabet Killer in Rochester, New York. This makes me question why the police didn't keep an eye on Bianchi. Welcome to the state of California. Case 1. Welcome to Santa Rosa, California. Unsolved Homicides. On February 4th, 1972, Yvonne Weber and Maureen Sterling, two 12-year-old white females, disappeared and vanished without a trace from Santa Rosa, California. On December 28, 1973, the remains of Yvonne Weber and Maureen Sterling were discovered, and they had been murdered. Case 2. Welcome to Forestville, California. Unsolved Homicides. On December 24, 1978, 15-year-old Carrie Ann Graham and 14-year-old Francine Trimble disappeared and vanished without a trace while walking to a mall in Forestville, California. On July 8, 1979, the remains of 15-year-old Graham and 14-year-old Trimble were discovered about 100 miles north of Forestville, California. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, Olivia will be on the line, and we will profile 4 California unsolved homicides committed by a serial killer. Be back in a moment.
You are not real. The reality of an observable entity designated by the term everyday life stands a good chance of remaining hypothetical for many people. You are not real. Indeed, the most striking feature of the present group for research on everyday life is obviously not the fact that it has not yet discovered anything. You are not, but the fact that the very existence of everyday life has been disputed from its very inception. And increasingly so with each new session of this conference. You are not real. Most of the talks we have heard so far have been by people who are not at all convinced that everyday life exists. You are not real. Since they haven't encountered it anywhere, you are not real. A group for research on everyday life with this attitude is comparable in every way to an expedition in search of the Yeti. You are not real. You are not real, which might similarly come to the conclusion that its core was merely a popular hoax.
Welcome to our MJ podcast, the series. Welcome to Serial Killer Avenue, Episode 3, Part 5, 4 California Unsolved Homicides. We have Olivia on the line. How are you doing tonight?
A little chilly, but otherwise pretty good.
Did you enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday?
Yes, I did. I actually have my cousins down from Boston, so I have them locked in a room.
Okay. Are you ready to dig in these unsolved mysteries?
Yes.
Okay, welcome to the state of California. The Murder Accountability Project and Project Cold Case report that from 1980 to 2019, there are over 48,000 unsolved homicides in the state of California.
Case 1. Welcome to Santa Rosa, California. Unsolved homicides. On February 4th, 1972, at around 9 p.m., Maureen Sterling and Yvonne Weber, two 12-year-old white females, disappeared and vanished without a trace from Redwood Empire Ice Arena in Santa Rosa, California. 12-year-old Yvonne Lisa Weber and Maureen Louise Sterling were students at Herbert Slater Middle School. They were good students and were loved by many, and there were no problems at home. Both young girls were last seen hitchhiking northwest of Santa Rosa, California. On December 28th, 1973, the skeletal remains of Yvonne Weber and Maureen Sterling were discovered. The 12-year-olds Weber and Sterling were located 2.2 miles north of Porter Creek Road on Franz Valley Road in Santa Rosa, California. The young girls' bodies were found down a steep embankment about 66 feet off the east side of the roadway. Investigators at the scene concluded that the killer had to have had some kind of physical strength because he lifted both girls across the ditch both before throwing them down a 66-foot embankment. A single earring, orange beads, and a 14-karat gold necklace with cross were found at the scene. The police did conclude that the girls had been murdered elsewhere and the killer had kept their clothes, possibly as trophies. The cause of death could not be determined from the skeletal remains. The murders of 12-year-old Yvonne Weber and Maureen Sterling remains unsolved. If you have any info concerning this case, please call Santa Rosa Police Department at 707-528-5222.
Case 2. Welcome to Forestville, California. Unsolved homicides. On December 24th, 1978, 15-year-old Carrie Ann Graham and 14-year-old Francine Trimble disappeared and vanished without a trace while walking to the mall to do some Christmas shopping in Forestville, California. A high school friend said that Graham and Trimble, after leaving the mall, was going to hitchhike to a party in Santa Rosa, California. The high school friend had no other information and did not know who the girls were meeting. Sonoma County Sheriff's Department responded by conducting a dual investigation but found neither girl had taken anything with them. Their makeup was found still arranged on the dresser in Trimble's room like they were getting ready to go somewhere and planned to return. Trimble recently undergone surgery to remove her appendix and her prescription medication was still in the room. Investigators speculated that Graham had gone next door to Trimble's home the day they disappeared and eventually concluded that the two young girls were runaways, meaning the investigation into their disappearances basically stopped, which was a terrible mistake. But it's one mistake that is made more common and still happens to this day. Both families feared the girls had been hitchhiking and possibly kidnapped. But with what the police was telling the families, they couldn't totally rule out the possibility that both had ran away. On July 8, 1979, in the afternoon hours, Two men from Sacramento were taking a drive to the coast and stopped at a turnaround along Highway 20, about 12 miles west of Willits, California. The area where the men pulled off the road is in a private land area near the Jackson Demonstration State Forest. One man ventured down the steep embankment near James Creek and made a gruesome discovery. He discovered a human skull slightly visible in what appeared to be a shallow grave halfway down the embankment. The two individuals left a soda can on the side of the road to mark the area and went to notify the police. Mendocino County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. They conducted an extensive ground search and found numerous skeletal remains scattered in the area, which later revealed the remains were of two individuals. The FBI joined the Sheriff's Department in an extensive 2-day search and were able to recover an estimated 90% of the skeletal remains. No clothing was found. Both victims had been bound with duct tape and hidden inside plastic trash bags and was buried in a shallow grave. Due to animal scavenging, police found pieces of duct tape, hair, and bones scattered around the embankment and the creek. Police determined both victims had been murdered at another location and the bodies were buried in a location most certainly after sundown. Autopsies concluded that the recovered remains were Caucasian. The estimated date of death was around December 8, 1978. At first, the coroner could not make a determination if the remains were male or female. Later, a forensic pathologist made the determination that one victim was a male and one was a female. Since everything was in question, added to the difficulties to properly identifying the victims. The report that the victims may have been related, possibly a brother and sister, surfaced, further confusing law enforcement. There were no missing person reports involving siblings received within the time frame or in the following years, and the two unidentified bodies were never connected to any missing person reports. The victims become informally known as John Doe and Jane Doe. There were major mistakes made that would hinder the FBI NCIC system from making a positive cross-reference match to missing person reports. In 2014, the remains of John and Jane Doe was exhumed, and a DNA test revealed that the once thought to be a male victim was in fact a female. In November 2015, the female remains were identified as 15-year-old Carrie Ann Graham and 14-year-old Francine Trimble of Forestville, California. It was Graham's remains that was first labeled as a male. Willits, California, where the victims were found, is more than 100 miles northwest of where Trimble and Graham had vanished without a trace from Forestville, California. The murders of Carrie Ann Graham and 14-year-old Francine Trimble are still unsolved. If you have any info concerning this case, please call the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office at 707-565-2185. As for Case 1, the unsolved homicides of 12-year-old Yvonne Weber and Maureen Sterling. The most looked at as suspects for the victims of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders were the Zodiac Killer and serial killer Ted Bundy. But what came to light was the Zodiac Killer didn't sexually assault his female victims. The Zodiac's known DNA profile didn't match the DNA found at the crime scenes. As for serial killer Ted Bundy, investigators found a paper trail that shows Bundy was in the state of Washington on the dates of two murders that is connected to the Santa Rosa hitchhiker serial killer. So, Olivia, where should the investigators direct their investigation in finding this killer?
Well, it's obvious it's a serial killer because I know you've told me many times that they keep things as trophies, and I think in both cases the clothes were missing. Am I correct?
Right, correct.
So if it's not Bundy, and it's not the Zodiac serial, it's some type of serial killer. It wasn't Bundy? Didn't he like...
Yeah, they found paper trail wasn't Bundy.
Who's the... Wait, I get him confused with the one that eats people. Who's that?
That was
Dahmer.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It could have been that nut that... No, it couldn't have been him. It couldn't have been that Israel Keys, could it? No.
No, not in the 70s.
He wasn't... Not in the 70s. Who was a serial killer out there? I can't think of the name of it. I know there was one. Oh, my God. Wasn't it, that guy that dressed like a clown? Wasn't he in California?
Oh, no, that was Chicago. That was Gacy.
That was Chicago. All right, I'm thrown off, yeah. But it's definitely a serial killer.
Okay.
And it's not these two, right?
Right.
It's not the Zodiac killer or Bundy.
Yeah.
You believe it's a serial killer, right?
Right, right.
Okay. Yeah, because it's like they're within a year of each other almost.
Yeah, one was
and they're kids.
70.
So it's someone that likes children, and there was a serial killer that liked children, but I think he was in the Midwest. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, there were several serial killers out in California at that time. And okay, in 2018, DNA from the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders and the Zodiac murders were brought out for testing, hoping to identify the killer or killers in the same manner as the Golden State Killer was caught by using DNA databanks to trace family trees. To our knowledge, those 2018 test results have never been released. Do you find it odd that so far the killer's DNA family tree profile isn't in the family tree system?
Well, excuse me. It would only be in the system if they committed a crime once before, correct?
Yes, that's why I said it. They're so far.
So apparently these people, this may have been the first time they murdered.
Okay. And
wait, I'm not done. I find it odd. But I don't know, it seems like there was a lot of errors by law enforcement in these cases. I mean, they thought the one girl was a boy.
Right, yeah.
You know, so I think it needs to be looked into further.
Okay. And do you think it's possible that the serial killer that they are looking for is a Charles Manson family defector?
That's it. That's who I was thinking of. Manson.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's somebody that was related to the Manson family.
Okay, this avenue fits the timeline involved. This Manson family defector, who has never been arrested to be fingerprinted or had their blood drawn by law enforcement. The Manson family defector could honed in his skills in the desert with Manson and learned by the mistakes made during and after the Tate and La Blanca killings. Do you think that is a possibility?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And just in my way of thinking, this could explain a lot of things why this serial killer hasn't been caught. And Olivia, is there anything you would like to add to these cases?
No, I just hope they find whoever it is. But I can't talk tonight. The Manson family defectors, are they still alive? Are they still floating around somewhere?
Yeah, many of them are still alive. Through the years, I've interviewed 2 former Manson family members, and through the years...
What do they like? Because he was a nut.
Well, see, that's
even
what
when
I mean.
He did interviews.
Yeah, the defectors I talked to left the group because Manson was getting way over the top. And then another one I talked to through the years was Sandra Good. Sandra Good runs Charlie Manson's website. She still runs it today, even after his death.
Yeah, I know there was a female involved in that.
Yeah.
But wasn't it like a cult he was involved in?
Yeah, that's why they call it the Manson family. He had several males and females living on their compound, which was Barker's Ranch and Spawn Ranch. They were old
They were in
Western
California.
movie. Right. They were old Western movie TV sets, especially Spawn Ranch.
Ah.
And
Oh, wow.
and George Spahn, who owned it, his payment for Manson and staying there, he had 2 females from Manson's family at his beck and call.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I always, I could never read about that guy because he always just, whenever I saw an interview of him, I had to turn it off. He just freaked me out. It was just, I mean, they were all weird, serial killers. But something about him he used to make some weird noise when they interview. He was just a nut.
Yeah, he was way out there.
You know the noise? He used to make some weird noise when he was interviewed.
Yeah, he made a lot of things. A lot of times at his parole hearings, he would just start singing.
Yeah, he was crazy. Yeah.
Okay, I want to thank Olivia for being on the show tonight. A special thanks to our viewers and listeners for tuning in, for y'all have been so kind. I have a quote for you all. They say a person needs just 3 things to be truly happy in this world. Someone to love, something to do, and something to hope for. Tom Bodett. Always remember, folks, that if you ever get bored with nothing to do, well, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised at what you might find. That's the end of our MJ podcast, the series. Welcome to Serial Killer Avenue. This has been episode 3, part 5, 4 California Unsolved Homicides. We say to all of you, good night from Morrisonville, New York, located in the Adirondack Mountains.
Homicides.